Right. Recording this just to document my day 4. I think this will be particularly useful for folks who are trying to follow along and get up to speed learning to code. I decided to switch gears a little bit and get to kind of Hello World, like basic setup on Rails, which is a platform that I'm more familiar with, to kind of compare and contrast. I did a bunch of basic setup using Next.js, which I knew nothing about, as an experiment to see how far I could get, just literally asking Claude, hey, generate code, and then copy and pasting it. Got, pretty far down that line. And I think it's going to be interesting to switch to something that I already know, just to kind of parallel path all this. I may also try Laravel. So I went straight to the Ruby on Rails guides for getting started. And one of the very first things they tell you to do is to make sure you have an up-to-date version of Ruby. So you need at least 3.2.0 or later. And so this, again, is what you're going to run in the terminal, right? So this guy here, you can open up terminal, and you would do Ruby -- version. I now have this working. I have 3.3.6 version of Ruby. And Ruby is a programming language, by the way, if you don't know what this is. It's it's a programming language, basically. And Rails is built on top of that. So you need to have Ruby in order to run Rails. And it's installed like locally onto your machine. Mac OS comes with a version of Ruby, but when I ran Ruby -- version, or this Ruby -v, which is the same thing, I actually got an outdated version of Ruby. It was like, it was less than 3.2. It was like 2 point something. And so, okay, I need to update it, right? So I tried to follow this. For more installation methods, except Windows, go to Ruby Lang. And then I found the instructions for Mac OS, and it's telling me right away to do brew install Ruby. So if you watch my other videos, brew is homebrew. That is a tool that you use to install a bunch of things like this, bundles of code that you're going to need to write other code. And I ran it, and so I don't recommend doing this, basically. So I'm kind of surprised that this is the flow that you get from the main Rails page. First of all, this didn't work properly for me right out of the gate. It did install a version of Ruby, but basically I couldn't then figure out how to get my system to use that new version. And so what you actually want to do, and so basically the problem with this is it's going to install one new version of Ruby, like Ruby 3.3.6. But over time, you might want to have multiple versions of Ruby. Basically, if you build an entire new app on top of a current version of Ruby, it's going to give you Ruby 3.3.6, you're going to get Rails, and you're going to get all these different versions of bundles of code. And then over time, those are going to go out of date. And if you then go ahead and say, okay, well, now we're going to get Ruby 4 dot whatever, and you install it on your machine, you go back to that old project, it's going to try to use Ruby 4 dot whatever, because you only got one version of Ruby on your machine, and that can break things. So what you actually want to do is to have multiple versions of Ruby, so that when you go to that, application that you're building, you just still use the same version of Ruby that you still have, unless you want to go ahead and manually update it. So you need a Ruby version managing system, and I'm super surprised that the Rails installation tutorial does not point you in this direction. I definitely recommend this Go Rails process. So this guide here, and again, it's also telling you to use Homebrew, which, okay, so you should do that. But it uses Homebrew to install some dependencies, OpenSSL, and a couple things like that. So this is telling you brew, install, and then each of these things are individual things that are going to get installed. So you could do brew, install, OpenSSL, and this @3 is a version. So it's going to say OpenSSL, whatever is like the latest version of 3 dot whatever. And then it's going to do brew install libyaml, brew install GMP, etc. So these are dependencies. And then for installing Ruby, it recommends using Mize. There's a bunch of Ruby version managers, RVM, RBenv. I don't know which one is good or which one is not, but this one seems fine. So you install Mize, you add something to your .zshrc file, and then you reload that, and then you use Mize to install a particular version of Ruby. So this is going to simultaneously download the latest Ruby. So it's a Ruby at 3. See, that's that same nomenclature. So this is going to install the latest version of 3.whatever.whatever, right? You could say Ruby at 3.3.4 if you wanted to get very specific. But if you say Ruby at 3, it's going to find whatever's the latest version and then install it for you. And this might go really well for you. It did not for me. I think the problem is that this is not actually a clean machine. I have been using the Apple MacBook export process. Every time I get a new MacBook, I'm actually importing all the data from my old MacBook. And I believe what had happened is I had basically just been porting over a bunch of really old versions of some of these dependencies, and I was getting very obscure errors. And I actually went to Twitter and spoke to the founder of GoRails and a couple of other people. I was able to basically get it working by essentially going through and not just installing these things, but going back and cleanly uninstalling every single thing I could possibly find and then reinstalling it all from scratch, including like Xcode developer tools, Homebrew itself, deleting Ruby, deleting all this kind of stuff, and then rerunning this entire process from the beginning, and that got it working. But I will say, don't get too frustrated by this process. This is one of the most annoying parts of getting started with Rails. Unfortunately, it's one of the first steps, which is pretty irritating. But I remember it also being kind of complicated the first time around. So I recommend folks stick with it, leverage resources like Twitter, like ChatGPT or Claude, and definitely follow a guide like this, not necessarily the main Ruby guide, although you do want to go back and double check all this. But long story short, I now have Rails installed 8.8.0. or 8.0.0, which is cool. I didn't realize we were on Rails 8. And so then what I decided to do, not to turn this into an advertorial for GoRails, I actually haven't used it before, so I don't know if it's good or not, but I remember back in the day, there was a similar website called Railscasts, and I know that this format of following a bunch of screencasts is really useful for me. So I decided to get a pro account, and basically I'm just going to try and speed run through some of these tutorials here. I'm probably going to skip this stuff, and I am doing this build a blog with Rails. I'm just going to try to speed run through a bunch of these things where it's going to build a new app entirely, just to kind of refamiliarize myself with the Rails structure and all of that. And so far, it's going well. I just spent maybe like an hour getting stuff set up. It's pretty cool, doing things with cursor here. So, one thing that's nice is like all of this Ruby code here, I just did, like, it has really intelligent autocompletes. So, for example, when I was setting up the controller for the blog post controller here, I literally just, created this file and then hit tab, and it created all this basic stuff. Standard Ruby templated code, a function to call all of the blog posts that I created. This app is the demo app from GoRails, which is basically like a blog, essentially, with blog posts and all that kind of stuff. And then when I created this view, you can just do something like, you can hit Command K to generate, and you can say, render all blog posts inside a list, including the title and body. Hit generate, and it just renders the code. And this is perfect. So this is like great Ruby code, which is pretty cool to not have to remember all this sort of stuff. And you can edit it as well. So you can go back and you can do Command K, and you can say, so actually put this in a UL list. Boop. Makes a nice little edit. Bang. That's all perfect. And then I believe you can also do stuff down here. You can say, let's just say you don't know Ruby code and you want to say just get all blog posts in a variable called blog posts. Boop. It should generate that. Yeah. Bang. Is that correct? So yeah, blog. Okay. And then blog posts dot. Yeah, so it lists it. So it helps you generate code in the command line. It helps you generate code inside this. And then I also had an issue here where you're supposed to place this index inside views, and I had accidentally put the file inside views/layouts. So I added like this inside there, which is not where it's supposed to be, and it wasn't rendering properly. And I just asked it in this chat, which you can open with Command L, I think. And I just said, why isn't this index.html ERB file rendering? I was inside it. I said, well, what's going on here, guys? Why is it not rendering? And it nailed it right out of the gate. Placing inside app views layouts is incorrect. Put it inside the controller name. So put it here, and that worked perfectly. So pretty cool to be able to just ask questions in the chat, to have it generate code. Overall, like, pretty impressed with this as a tool. So I'm going to just sort of stay the course here and try to speed run through these tutorials just to refamiliarize myself. And I'll post videos if it's interesting, but I don't know. If I end up just sort of following this stuff, I won't necessarily live record all that.